Hey everybody, this is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and in this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A72 and the Samsung Galaxy A71. Let's get started. So the Samsung Galaxy A71 has a 6.7-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 394, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 84.4%. We got a hole punch here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 32 megapixels. The Samsung Galaxy A71 has a 6.7-inch Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 393, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. This phone also has a 32 megapixel hole punch front-facing camera that looks really good as well. So overall, both of these phones have a really high quality display that is pretty similar. The Super AMOLED display is really nice because the colors are going to be a lot brighter and just look better in general. The biggest difference here is the Samsung Galaxy A72 has a 90Hz display, whereas the A71 only has a 60Hz display. And the difference is with a 90Hz display, the A72 is going to have faster, more smooth, fluid motions on the screen. Whereas with the A71, it's still going to be good, but it's not going to be quite as fast as the A72. So if you're doing something like high performance gaming or content consumption in general, watching videos, doing that sort of thing, that's when the difference is really going to show up. Otherwise, these displays are pretty similar. Both of the phones are getting 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and that's definitely a good amount of storage. These days, the system and apps and pretty much everything is just getting larger and larger, so you can't rely on something like 64 gigabytes if you do have a lot of content and a lot of data that you're storing on your phone. Now, you might be able to get away with less depending on what you're doing, but I always think it's better to have more than you think you need because it's better to have extra than not enough. Now, unfortunately, neither of these phones have wireless charging, but both of them do have a fingerprint scanner. These fingerprint scanners are located right here on the display, and I think they look really nice. Let's go ahead and test them out and see how they perform. So we're gonna do the A72 first. Really nice. One more time. Really fast and responsive. I have no complaints here. Let's try out the A71. One more time. So that was really fast and responsive as well. I do think the fingerprint scanner here is actually the same. I didn't notice any difference whatsoever. They look the same, perform the same, but at the end of the day, it's a really good fingerprint scanner regardless, so I'm definitely happy with it. Let's take a look at the rear camera setups. The Samsung Galaxy A72 has a 64 megapixel rear camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. These are all really good features. It basically has everything, and the telephoto lens is a nice addition to this. Telephoto lenses are usually put on higher end phones like flagship phones, and you rarely see one on a phone of this level, so that was a really nice surprise. I don't know why they kept the macro camera in that case though, because the telephoto lens can do basically the same thing. It's a bit of a waste of space in my opinion, but at the same time, it's not like it's getting in the way or anything, so I guess it's okay. Now the A71 has a 64 megapixel rear camera as well, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. Pretty much every feature here is the same except the telephoto lens. There is no telephoto lens on this camera, which I remember when I was seeing the A71 for the first time, I was a little disappointed by, so I'm glad that they changed that with the A72. So these pictures were both taken by the rear cameras of each phone. They are really good quality pictures. Neither of them are bad by any means, but I do think the A72 is just a tiny bit better. If you can see here, the colors are a little bit more vivid on the A72's picture, as well as the brightness and just general lighting. That being said, both of them are really good. I would think if you're trying to get a phone that takes really good pictures, you're not going to go wrong with either of them. Both of these phones shoot in 4K in both the rear and the front cameras. So again, there's no clear advantage there. The only real difference is going to be what you saw in that photo demonstration. So if you liked one better than the other, then that's going to stay the same in the video mode as well. Now internally, the Samsung Galaxy A72 is getting 8 gigabytes of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 720G processor. We ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone and it came back with a single core score of 553 and a multi-core score of 1657. The A71 is getting 6 gigabytes of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 730 processor. We ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone as well, and it came back with a single core score of 547 and a multi-core score of 1737. So it is a little bit of a downgrade, not much, but still a little bit, enough for me to be kind of disappointed. Usually when there's a new model of a phone, it'll go at least a little bit up, definitely something noticeably better, but in this case, it actually did go down. The processing power of the A72 is lower than the A71. The one thing I would say though about the A72 that is an improvement is the RAM. This phone has 8 gigabytes of RAM, whereas the A71 only has 6. So if you're doing something that's really taxing on the processor, the A72 might be able to handle it a little bit better. Just to give you a better idea of what this difference in processing power looks like in real life, I'm going to do a quick demonstration. So we're going to start by opening Google Chrome. So that was really close, almost the same, but I did see the A71 pull it up just a tiny bit faster. Let's try web page and see if that's consistent. So again, almost the same. It's really not different enough to be a deal breaker, but the A71 did pull it up just a tiny bit faster. Let's try one more just to be sure. So that was almost exactly the same. I honestly can't tell while we're recording which one actually opened it up faster, but the bottom line is the speed is so similar that it's really not a significant difference. I wouldn't choose one phone over the other just because it can browse the web faster. Really, the main difference is going to come when the processor is worked really hard, in which case the A72 in theory would be a little bit better just because it has 2 gigabytes more RAM and it should be able to handle things a little better despite the A71 having more processing power. Now battery-wise, the A72 is a little bit of an improvement from the A71 with the 5,000 mAh battery versus a 4,500 mAh battery. It's really not a huge difference. A 4,500 mAh battery is definitely a larger battery as well, but if you want the biggest battery possible, say you're on the go a lot and don't actually have time to plug your phone in, or just simply not ever near a charger, but also need to use the phone throughout the day, then it does make sense to go all in with the A72 and get that bigger battery. Another thing to keep in mind is both these phones actually support 25-watt fast charging, so if you do use a fast charger, this is definitely a benefit. Now, one thing that was introduced with the A72 that the A71 doesn't have is dust and water protection. Now, the A72 has water resistance up to 1 meter for 30 minutes, which is really impressive considering that's a feature that I've only ever seen in really high-end phones for the most part. So I was really excited to see that with both the A72 and the A52 that I've also covered in several other videos. Definitely, if you're working in a more rough environment with lots of dust or a lot of water, if you're in a place where it rains a lot and you're stuck outside, whatever the case may be, you are going to have an advantage with the A72 for that reason. Now, in conclusion, which of these phones is actually better? I would say overall, the A72 is a better phone. It's definitely got some things that were improved from the A71. For example, the 90 Hz display is really nice, especially if you're doing content consumption. You're really going to be able to take advantage of those smoother movements on the screen as opposed to the 60 Hz display that the A71 has. I do think the camera is just a tiny bit better on the A72. And not only that, but it has better features too. This phone actually has a telephoto lens, whereas the A71 only has a macro camera, and a telephoto lens is definitely more valuable. As far as the processor goes, it is really debatable. The speed and power really, if you're doing basic tasks, looks exactly the same. During most of that demonstration, I could barely tell which one was doing things faster. And while it is true that the A71 does have more processing power, the A72 has more RAM. So it should be able to handle more demanding activities a little bit better, especially if you're doing multiple things at once. If you have a lot of background apps running and are trying to do something else, then that extra RAM will come in handy. And of course, the battery is definitely better on the A72, and it has some nicer features like the dust and water resistance that we don't get with the A71. But overall, even though the A72 is a clear improvement from the A71, if you're looking for a phone that has a decent amount of processing power, a really high quality camera, a great display, and a lot of other nice features, then you're not going to go wrong with either of these phones. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.